Hey everybody. Hey everybody. I got this idea to do a time lapse of a drum setup. Just, I don't know, mostly because I had a camera. And I sped it up to 20x, which is the most that iMovie will allow you to speed something up. And I realized it was still over 10 minutes long. So I figured I'd sit here and attempt to talk through it. So I have no idea what I'm going to do to fill that amount of time. So you know what's going to happen? I'm going to pause this real quick and look at something. Well, I'm back. I have a bunch of notes about possible future blogs or vlogs or something, and I'm pretty excited about most of them. But all of them seem like they're either too big or I just don't feel like dealing with it right now. So I'll try to talk about drum setups. Makes sense given the context of this. So let's see. All right, my kit is a maple kit. It's not maple, it's birch. I just lied. Most kits are maple. I'm not actually sure why. I've never really used enough different kits and enough context. And honestly, the shell has, compared to just what heads you pick and how you've tuned your drum kit, the shell is of such minuscule importance that other than like a very loose thought that maple is a little bit punchier than birch, and those would be the only two that I'm really versed in. I wouldn't be able to tell you the difference, and probably in a finished mix could not ever tell you in a shootout, because of the way so much of the sound is determined by the mic and the EQ and the compression. So I'm not sure how much that matters. Even plywood drums are fine if they're round and they have new heads and those heads are tuned properly. You can pretty much make anything sound good in the end, especially a kick drum. I mean, kick drums are just works of fiction in modern, well, pop music anyway. Obviously, not all music styles, but these are birch, and I feel like I like birch, and by that I mean mostly I've recorded this kit hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm going to leave that stupid sound in. And I've had very good success with it. Of course, depending largely on who's playing. It's weird how much two different drummers can affect the sound of a drum kit. It's really surprising, especially with a drum kit like this that I know very well, and I've recorded hundreds of times. I've heard it sound amazing and just punchy and full, and I've heard it sound like a bag of just overcooked mashed potatoes. And it's mostly just the rigidity with which you hit the drum and the area with where you hit the drum. Most non-drummers don't really think about where they're hitting the drum. Most drummers do. But you really want to be in like this like 3-4 inch area, unless like if you're hitting on the rim for an effect, of course that's totally different. You can hit the drum anywhere you think it sounds good. But for most like pop and rock and stuff, you want to be pretty much in the center and a nice solid hit. Although I've seen a couple people that play very softly and still have good tone. It is, in my experience, that was me hitting keys. In my experience, it is by far the exception that light hitters have good tone. Usually it's just hard hitters, or not necessarily, it's just hitting a drum kit hard is an easy way out of having to really have good touch and good aim. I really don't know why. It's just when, I don't know the physics of it. There's probably a physical reason, but when the drum is fully engaged, the tone your aim just matters less. It doesn't make it immaterial by a very long shot, but it's, the sweet spot seems much bigger. Really good players can play at basically any volume and their kit will still sound amazing. Head selection, I'm very much of a mind about head selection, that there's not a lot of right ways to do it. Mostly when you're getting heads, you're being forced to choose between the thickness of the head and the tone of the head for the most part. As long as the head is well manufactured, you lose stick sound, which is the bright attack part in front of the boom, You lose stick when you have a thicker head, and you lose overtones. The overtones get less complex. So overall, what you're trading is like the durability of a head, and since the thicker heads have less overtones, they're just much easier to tune because you don't have to. The tuning doesn't have to be so perfect in order to have the overtones be pleasant. They just don't exist in the first place. But that lack of complexity is kind of a little bit of a problem with tone. I guess, it's another one of those things. It does depend on your style, but most of the time, if you have bright things like toms with more stick attack, it's much easier to me to like just have something be bright and then darken it up a little bit, or usually almost never darkening things up. You're just not brightening them even more. But it's usually easier to start with a brighter source, even if you want a darker one. Then if you start with a dark source, then you got to add EQ, and EQ just does not sound the same no matter what you do. I don't care what EQ you use. None of that makes any difference at all. The sound of EQ is different than the sound of that same instrument, but brighter, just by 100%. So I say just start bright and work backwards usually. That's not to say thin, but if you don't know what you're doing, actually, thin's better than thick, because more records are ruined by woofiness and boominess by far than by brightness. But that's neither here nor there. So most recordings are done with just like coated ambassadors or clear ambassadors or maybe even diplomats. I go all the way to pinstripes, which a lot of studio guys don't like, but they're a little more tame than like ambassadors are. But they're still good, and there's still good stick attack to pinstripes, at least in my estimation. All these heads I refer to, I always talk in Remo just because it's by far the most common sort of drum head out there. So it's the ones the most people know. Evans is very good too. Everybody that makes a drum head probably makes a pretty good drum head, and they all basically make the same 6 things or something like that. So it's really not about the brand or the make or the model. Mostly it's about the construction. And then, very secondarily, it's about the actual maker of the drum head. So now we've got our entirely plywood drums, because Andy says plywood sounds amazing and absolutely nothing is better than plywood. And we've selected generally heads on the thin side. So now when you put the heads on, there's one gripe I have with basically all drummers, maybe ever, is that they don't take good care of their kits. So really make sure that just oil your lugs. Just take your drum kit and sit down in front of the TV with just a little bit of grease or any old oil hanging around the house is better than nothing. And just as you watch a movie on the floor, screw every lug out, put a little grease or whatever on it, screw every lug back in, make sure they're free of rust and stuff. Hopefully it hasn't gotten that far, but if it has, maybe repair them, buy new parts. I don't know, do whatever you want. So if your lugs are smooth, then tuning a drum is actually pretty easy, and I find it's actually easier to do by the feel of the tension in the lugs than by the sound, or at least it's significantly faster. Not everybody subscribes to this, obviously, but you just put the heads on and you put them on, just put everything on finger tight, take the floor tom. It's a relatively easy one. Second tom's always murder, don't know why. So put the head on like finger tight, and take the lug and just turn it like, I don't know, just till there's a little bit of tension in it. You got to work it out. You'll figure it out after a couple tries, and feel how that feels on your wrist, and just go all the way around. And if the lugs are in really good condition, then you can actually just tune entirely by feel, and it takes like seconds. Maybe you got to go back and like loosen everything up and try again. Who knows? So, but in general, it's really quick and fairly reliable. And if it just sounds weird, just try a different tension all the way around. The best thing to do on a drum kit if you get lost, which of course is fairly common, is to just tune it all the way back down till the head is just floppy and it's like finger tight again, and start again. Because you can kind of get lost in this weird mid-ground where you've gone up and then you went down and then you weren't sure or something like that. You're usually just it's too late by the time you're there. Just go back to the beginning and start again. It's like so much easier. Generally, I like my drums tuned pretty low. Not the snare, but all the toms just above wrinkly usually is my happy spot. Of course, I've heard people make them work much higher than that, but not usually for like rock and pop styles, usually for like jazz or, you know, kind of quirky something or other. Usually about the same for the kick drum, like it pretty low. Action becomes a problem, especially with the kick drum, but also with the other drums when you go too flat, but usually they sound good, pretty flat. Kick drum's the only one that really becomes a feel problem when it's as flat as I want it. Okay, let's see here. Oh, okay, so that is a ML19. I use that for the room pretty commonly. I like that's a ribbon mic. That's the P30 and Earthworks P30. I use it for accessories and stuff. They're actually chorus mics. They're amazing. They're the ones I use on acoustics. Those are RN17, small diaphragm overheads. They're really nice mics. I bought them just for overheads. Mostly I use SM57s on the toms by choice. I'm going to pause the video here because I didn't leave myself enough time. I use toms on 57s by choice. I actually really like them. I wish you could use an SM57 on a floor tom, but you can't because the frequency response really isn't that great in the fundamental of a floor tom, which is usually around like 60, 65, 70 hertz if you really get it cranked up. I don't know. So I end up using a Beyer M201 currently, and I'm pretty happy with that. But something about SM57s really works. I just cracked my knuckle. Sorry about that. Something about SM57s really works for me on toms. Just always has. Same thing on a snare. SM57 is the most used mic on a snare of all time, and generally with good reason. You can shoot out all day long, and you'll find maybe a mic that works better on a snare, but on average for your money, you're just not going to do better than a 57. It just kind of matches with the instrument for whatever reason. Using I didn't show the kick side. I'm sorry about that. I wasn't thinking when I made the video. I guess I was just playing around. I use a Audix D6 on the inside now, pretty much exclusively. That is a heavily pre-EQ'd mic. I like the sound of it a lot, but some people don't like them because they feel like they're overblown. But the thing is, I use a ribbon outside mic, ML19, which is a different Russian ribbon mic. And I get a lot of my kick sound from the outside, so the fact that the inside is pretty over EQ'd just right out of the box is fine, because I'm generally using it for the attack mostly, and sometimes the bottom, but not usually. I'm usually pulling a lot of the bottom and the body out of the front mic anyway, so a very heavily colored internal kick mic is fine. I didn't show the back of the kick drum, but I'll take a picture and insert that. Hopefully you're looking at that right now. I usually make a tent around the back of the kick drum, and a lot of people make a tunnel for tonal reasons because it kind of gives this like mid, like rangy kind of boxy punch that's really fun to add, but I don't make a tunnel for that reason. I make a tunnel because I use soundproof blankets, actual ones, not moving truck blankets, though they look exactly the same, to keep the cymbal bleed out of the outer kick mic so that it's more manageable, because the cymbal bleed in the outer kick can just be awful if you want to compress it even at all. It basically becomes unmanageable. Usually, a lot of times, even with the blanket, I end up replacing the outer kick mic, though, because I rely on it so much that it can be weird. I like to gate the kick mics, and sometimes if the cymbal bleed is especially bad, which usually it's not that bad, but if it happens to be especially bad and then you're gating, so you have the cymbal sound changes when the gate opens, and that's intolerably bad sounding. So at that point, you just replace the drum because you were smart and you got samples of it off of the actual kit you're recording, instead of just using one of the slate kits. And you can replace it with the sound of the actual drum you recorded. Or if something sucked, I mean, as it, of course will happen, you will go back into your extensive library of sounds you've collected over the years and get the kick drum sound from a drummer that didn't suck, because usually that's what makes the difference, weirdly enough. Claude Coleman, you know him from Ween. Also, he's an Asheville local, was in here one time. Super nice guy. He had what he called his third world kit. It and it just lives in the back of his car, and it has top heads only. It's just trash assembled. All of them are different drums. I'm sure they're all just cheap drums. He even said it was his third world kit. That was his line. And he set it up, and it sounded great. And it sounded great because Claude Coleman was playing them, and some people can make any trash sound good. That's the difference between amazing musicians and okay musicians, is really good musicians can just make anything work. But that's kind of late stage stuff. You don't get to do that right away. It takes a long time to become that sort of good. Anyway, I kind of lost my train of thought. Kick drums. I think I said what I wanted to say. I'll insert a picture of the tunnel. I hope this was in any way informative or enjoyable. It's really more of a test run than anything. Maybe I'll do one again. The problem I have is I'm busy, which is a good problem to have for somebody that does what I do. I would like to do more video stuff just for the fun of it, but that would require me recording less. All right, guys and girls, thank you so much.